Over time, divine retribution caught up with King Leopold II, for his son was born with a horrifying deformity reminiscent of all the horrors Leopold had committed in Belgium. The first Leopold, despite his reputation, was celebrated as the builder monarch for supporting large-scale construction projects and modernizing the country. However, behind this facade, a terrible truth lurked. His colonial expedition to the Congo Free State was rooted in bloody crimes, which became scenes of inhumane brutality, making him a real butcher. Although the French Revolution had a profound impact well beyond Paris, guillotine sentences became an integral part of political life, and scenes of executions symbolized change. Leopold II's grandfather was forced to flee for his life, escaping to the United Kingdom, where he soon passed away. His mother, Louise of Orleans, regarded as a sensitive and delicate woman, was shattered by grief and followed her husband to the grave within the same year. Young Leopold, as a teenager, gradually lost his close relatives. Constant losses occurred within the family. It was only once, to heal his broken heart, that he found solace in a new marriage. 3 years after his mother's death, the young king was crowned, marrying Marie Henriette of Habsburg-Lorraine, a woman of brilliance, energy, and kindness. She was characterized by a lively spirit and friendliness, contrasting with his reserved and introverted nature. Leopold II's public rise began in 1813, when he became a senator and heir to monarchical power. He did not waste time, openly expressing his views, even if they seemed controversial. He was particularly attracted to the idea of expanding Belgium's colonial possessions. He actively traveled through regions of Asia and Africa in search of opportunities to extend the country's influence. In December of the year 1830, just days after the death of his father, King Leopold I, young Leopold ascended to the throne, taking on the title of King of the Belgians. Despite the horrific atrocities he later brought to Congo, he managed to demonstrate some progressive initiatives within the country. Among his most significant legislative achievements were large-scale social reforms, including granting workers the right to unionize, passing legislation on child labor to protect Belgium's youth from exploitation, and introducing days off, notably Sundays, which was a highly symbolic and relevant step for workers. Paradoxically, these positive changes seemed important to him despite the shadow cast over his foreign policy, the cruelty and bloodshed in the Congo colony, which he organized and supported. Rand Vision, acting as an ambitious and far-reaching political figure, represented a character whose scope and ambitions extended beyond the ordinary horizon. Part 2 of 8. His plan involved creating an extensive overseas empire, consisting of numerous colonies scattered across various parts of the world. However, despite his outward determination, Vishnu's true motives and intentions soon became increasingly clear. He seemed primarily driven by a desire to personally acquire these territories, using state funds for his own purposes rather than pursuing national policy interests or development. Initially, his focus was on the Philippines. He believed that the owner of this archipelago, Queen Isabella II of Spain, who by that time was considered a weak ruler, could easily become a target for purchase and sale. His plan was to establish control over the colony without much regard for the cost, covertly, through his envoy, avoiding open proposals to prevent offending Spain. However, when in 1868 the Queen lost the throne and power in Spain passed to new rulers, Leopold made a new attempt to acquire the Philippines. A complication arose. He lacked sufficient funds for such an expensive deal. He then sought ways to execute his plan and came up with a clever hack to make the Philippines recognized as an independent state, thus creating an opportunity for private purchase. When this cunning plan failed, his envy and greed shifted focus to other regions. For more than 10 years, Leopold unsuccessfully tried to incorporate territories in Africa and Asia into his empire. It became increasingly obvious that a change in strategy was necessary, as mere dreams and schemes were insufficient. In 1876, he organized an international scientific and charitable association called the International African Society. In reality, this was just a cover, a private holding company entirely owned by him. To achieve his goals, Leopold hired the experienced explorer and adventurer Henry M. Stanley, who was sent to Central Africa to establish a colony there. Through far-sighted diplomacy, Leopold managed to gain recognition from most European countries and the United States of America as the official owner of this newly claimed territory, which was confirmed at the 20th Century Berlin Conference. Ultimately, only in 1885 was he able to realize his long-standing dream, the formation of a colony called the Free State of Congo. This new colonial territory was nearly 80 times larger than Belgium itself, and Leopold's government fully took control of it. Owning this vast area, he created his own army, the so-called Trinity of Public Forces, famous as the Combat Force, which became his support in managing and protecting his interests. The first natural resources that his colony began to exploit were elephants and their ivory, a highly valuable and profitable commodity. However, Leopold was not satisfied with that. He dreamed of more and continued seeking ways to expand his income. Soon it became clear that natural resources alone were not enough to satisfy his greed for wealth, so he began actively developing new methods of extracting revenue from the colony. Initially, Leopold II's plan was to utilize the natural wealth of Congo to achieve his ambitions in Belgium. He relied on profits from resource exports and hoped to significantly enhance his personal and political power through colonial revenues. In the first years of his rule, one of his main tasks was to gather as many resources as possible to strengthen his position and fund further plans. However, everything changed in an instant. A sharp and unexpected rise in demand for rubber radically shifted the balance of power. While Congo was rich in natural resources, one of the most lucrative became latex, the sap extracted from rubber trees. This sap had immense commercial potential, and its collection promised to significantly boost the treasury. Extracting the sap required significant labor. Workers endured hours of exhausting and arduous work, collecting latex from trees. At the same time, while Leopold publicly defended the rights and interests of ordinary workers in Belgium, within his colony, he dictated a very different policy, which starkly contrasted with his diplomatic rhetoric and declarations. Needing cheap and mass labor, he easily abandoned his obligations, arising from the conditions of the Berlin Conference, and ceased even to pretend to care about the well-being of local inhabitants. In practice, something horrific was happening: the overt and ruthless destruction of all morality. Leopold completely isolated his colony from the outside world, so that no interference would hinder his personal enterprises. In such a secluded corner, he could do whatever he pleased, without regard for international opinion. Using force, he compelled the local populations to work, collecting latex, which he sold back home at sky-high prices. The people of Congo never received even the slightest monetary compensation or fair reward for their labor. But far worse horrors occurred, horrors that shocked everyone who learned about them. People did not voluntarily go to work, so Leopold devised terrible methods of coercion. These included brutal beatings, mass and indiscriminate executions, and torturous mutilations, savage injuries inflicted to intimidate. To secure compliance even from the most independent and resilient Congolese, the force of coercion became overwhelming. Workers' families were often kidnapped to force them to continue working. Part 4 of 8. A particularly famous photograph depicts the grief and despair of a Congolese man. Before him lie a severed hand and the leg of his 5-year-old daughter. Failure to meet rubber collection quotas was punishable by death, and to prove they had fulfilled their plan, workers were forced to bring in severed hands as evidence. Sometimes those who survived executions pretended to be dead in order to escape and avoid further punishment. The most brutal symbol of these atrocities became baskets filled with severed hands, which were placed at European posts and used as proof of profitable work rather than as trophies. The so-called hand collection transformed into a separate industry of fear and terror. Soldiers of Force Peak, the name given to Leopold's colonial rangers, brought these mutilated limbs to stations, replacing collected rubber with horrifying proof of their work, embodying the worst manifestations of cruelty possible under colonial conditions. When the English missionary John Harris arrived in the territory of the Free State of Congo, he was confronted with horrors that words could hardly describe. His stunned eyes bore witness to how people gathered, instead of traditional rubber, what became a peculiar form of currency, something exchangeable for everything: food, essential items, and even moral survival. This scene forever remained in memory as a symbol of the heartlessness and cruelty that reigned in colonial Africa. When he later tried to recount his experiences, words seemed incapable of fully capturing the scale of suffering and terror he had witnessed. Soon after, inspired by his observations among the local population, he began to speak about how dire the plight of the people had become, fallen into complete despair and hopelessness. The magnitude of this tragedy was difficult to express in simple words, as the disaster was so vast and all-consuming that every new detail seemed unbearably horrific. The very fact that these horrors continued with the full indifference and increasing brutality of the leader, King Leopold II, causing only quiet but persistent outrage, demonstrates how strong his grip on power was. Despite the growing number of protests and condemnations from the international community, the king continued his policy of terror, ignoring both world opinion and human suffering. Historian, writer, and journalist Adam Hochschild was the first to present the public with an accurate and fairly clear assessment of the destructive repercussions of Leopold's rule. Using statistical data from the Belgian population census, he calculated that approximately 10 million people had died as a result of the ruler's brutal methods, about half of the entire population of the region, which had become a victim of colonial repression. The mechanism of cruel and heartless treatment of the local people was horrific in itself, but the consequences of this mass terror turned out to be even more destructive. As a result, with the spread of diseases such as smallpox and sleeping sickness, thousands of Congolese died from deteriorating living conditions, malnutrition, and medical neglect. These tragedies could not have arisen suddenly. They were direct consequences of the conscious negligence and malicious intentions of the ruler. Despite the outward appearance of stability, eventually karma caught up with the injustice. And in 1902, after years of tyranny, it happened. King Leopold was finally forced to leave his bloody reign when, under pressure from the international community and widespread condemnation, he was compelled to sell his colony. Changes occurred when British novelist Joseph Conrad, serving as the captain of a steamer, visited Congo. His concern for the fate of the local inhabitants was so strong that it changed his life course and views on colonial slavery. His book, published in 1902 under the title Heart of Darkness, became a sensation worldwide. In this work, he gave readers a unique opportunity to see the horrors that unfolded daily under the shadow of European colonial expansion firsthand. The story told by Conrad deeply shocked readers and increased pressure on the king and his regime. Suffering, humiliation, and destruction faced by the people. That is what was revealed to readers through the pages of the book. After its publication, in an attempt to improve his reputation and perhaps eliminate negative perceptions, King Leopold began taking steps to craft a positive image. He hired American writer Mary French Sheldon to travel to Congo and observe the region from the inside. However, in order to manipulate public opinion and hide all the horrors, the regime's leaders created a specially curated travel program for her, exposing only the aspects of events they wanted her to see. Upon returning to England, Mary Sheldon wrote notes and articles claiming that she had seen more horrors and crimes in London than during her entire stay in Congo. By 1908, when even some of Leopold's subjects, Belgians, began expressing dissatisfaction and condemnation, the political support for the king was rapidly waning. Eventually, under pressure from the international community and internal opposition, Leopold was forced to sell his colony, leaving behind the bloody and brutal regime he had cemented in pursuit of personal ambitions and power. Of course, he primarily ensured he was generously compensated for his role in the colonial exploitation, because the shame of liberated Congo reflected not only on Leopold II, but also on Belgium as a whole. The Belgian people had to pay a colossal price, 215 million francs, of which 50 million went directly into Leopold's personal pocket, and another 45 million funded his extensive internal development projects. Despite his heinous crimes in Congo, he was perceived in Belgium as a talented restorer and architect. He allocated a significant portion of the proceeds obtained from the exploitation of the colony to fund grandiose construction projects across the country. Among the most famous structures commissioned by him are the Basilica of the Sacred Heart, the Wellington Track Hippodrome, and, quite ironically, the Royal Museum of Central Africa. After the Belgian parliament forced Leopold to sell Congo, he began to destroy evidence, avoiding acknowledgement of his numerous crimes. Reports suggest he told his associates that they have no right to know what I did there. However, not all of his hard-earned income from the bloody crimes in Congo was used for the benefit of the Belgian people. Despite these noble intentions, the royal builder had a weakness for luxury and his own wealth. He acquired several private villas, expanded the royal castle in Lecken, and created magnificent personal gardens. His marriage to Gertrude did not meet expectations, even though the union produced 4 children. Soon after, Leopold lost his only son, Prince Leopold, who at 9 years old fell into a pond and contracted pneumonia. The illness proved fatal, and the boy never recovered. The loss of an heir brought him profound grief and had a destructive impact on his marriage. In an attempt to have another heir, he tried unsuccessfully, managing to leave only one more daughter. This blow of fate and the separation from his wife in the early 20th century led to an irreparable split. At the same time, the novel Heart of Dark Times was published, and Gertrude, unable to withstand the emotional turmoil, took her own life. After her death, she left the funeral ceremony early, and at that moment, Leopold was targeted. An Italian anarchist fired 3 bullets into the monarch's carriage. However, all missed their mark, which was apparently due to his high vigilance and bravery, despite the tragedies and grim history of his reign. Nevertheless, Leopold's reputation did not go unchallenged. The residents of Belgium warmly welcomed his recovery and return, especially after he attended the theater on the same day and was met with loud applause. Despite his international fame and authority being significantly undermined, he still maintained enough respect and recognition to receive letters of support from foreign diplomats, including the Pope, who sent him a letter of solidarity. One could say that, despite all the terrible deeds and scandals associated with his imperial reputation, Leopold remained a person of notable authority. However, his personal life was entirely at odds with the image of a virtuous monarch. Throughout his marriage, he repeatedly engaged in extramarital affairs. Essentially, every time he entered into an official union with Maria Henrietta, he did not conceal his passions and intrigues behind her back. However, none of these relationships could overshadow the one that started when he was 16, with a young maid named Carolina Lacqua. By the age of 65, just 3 years before his wife's death, Leopold began a romance that ultimately destroyed the remnants of his honorable reputation and sparked a new wave of outrage among the public. This affair with the young woman caused a scandal. A monarch seated on the throne for many years increasingly became a target for criticism. He showered Carolina with an incredible amount of gifts and wealth, including large sums of money, entire estates, and even granted her the title of Baroness. Leopold's love for Lacqua was so intense that he fathered 2 illegitimate sons by her, both of whom he ennobled, further intensifying the scandal. The first son was born with a noticeable deformity of the arm, and this feature provoked a wave of criticism from Belgian newspapers, one of which called this fact divine revenge. To secure the future of his possessions, castles, and palace complexes, Leopold, who had no heir, devised a cunning plan. He established the so-called Royal Trust, a special fund intended to guarantee that his wealth would be inherited by Belgium after his death. The contract included provisions allowing his family members to freely use all real estate and movable property at their discretion. The final act of the ruler, which marked his ultimate passionate gesture, was a secret marriage ceremony with his long-term lover that took place just 5 days before his death. Fortunately, when this secret union became known, the Belgian parliament declared it invalid and annulled it. Leopold II never faced the deserved retribution for the horrific crimes committed in Congo, and no monuments or palaces in Belgium could atone for his sins. After his death, a multitude of wealth and estates were bequeathed as inheritance, but they could not change the fact that his name would forever remain in history as a symbol of cruelty and wrongful deeds. Some time ago, Leopold II held a significant sum of money invested in Congolese securities. He entrusted these riches to his mistress named Laqua, as well as left them to his daughters from his first marriage. However, attempts to recover this money were futile. All efforts proved useless. Ultimately, Laqua managed to take away the wealth soaked in blood and suffering, the very wealth of Leopold II. This story serves as a reminder of the thin line between power and betrayal, where wealth gained through brutal methods and sacrifices gently slips from the hands of those who trusted in it. Ultimately, human greed and betrayal leave behind only memories of lost riches and shattered lives. Thank you for your attention to our historical overview. If you're interested in learning the most exciting and instructive facts from the past, stay tuned to our content. Don't forget to visit the main page, where even more astonishing information about everything in the world awaits you.